Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Conversations in Time podcast. So, over to the guys.
Hello, and welcome to another Conversations in Time podcast. I'm John N.
And I'm Ian G.
Right, so today then, Ian, the counterfactual bus or train, I think, has stopped because it's wrong leaves on the track, and we decided to.
I think you're getting your metaphors mixed up there, John.
Yeah,
it was the wrong type of snow, and it's just leaves on the line.
Leaves on the So we've got leaves on the line
rather than the wrong type of leaves. But yeah,
that's right. Yeah, and so we thought we'd do one of our occasional series episodes. Whatever happened to? So, whatever happened to what today then, Ian?
The record shop, or the high street record shop, or the shop where you got your records from.
So. That's right. I mean, we are talking back in the day, and for many of our listeners, assuming they're older, I'm trying to think how old they would have to be to actually remember record shops when they sort of faded. I know that ultimately there are a few coming back, but they're really hidden away, small affairs.
Well, apart from the elephant in the room HMV, which is
but do they sell records?
Correct, they do, because my daughter buys them.
All right, but they stopped selling them.
Well, they've been in receivership, or whatever they call it in America, Chapter 11 or something. But it's not just for American listeners. It is, but they were bought out by somebody, and they're doing all right now. But they don't. But they sell all sorts of rubbish now. But and they sell record players. But yeah, it's certainly not like you used to be. And there are 3 or 4 other independent shops in the high street anymore, and there isn't. W.H. Smith used to sell records, didn't it? And even books.
No, that's right.
So but yeah,
I mean, I don't know when they all sort of went out of fashion. I don't believe it was because of cassettes. It was obviously because of CDs, and I'm not sure when the CD.
So that would be the mid '90s, I guess. Really, I mean, it's probably.
Yeah. So if you're mid '90s, I'm just trying to figure out how old. 1980. Right. Then. So if you were born 1980 or before, or 1985, arguably, and before, you'd remember them, but anybody born after 1985 might not really understand the sort of cultural, I won't say significance, but the cultural thing around buying records before you could just download them onto your phone or listen to them for free with the odd advert. It was just a completely different modern age at that time. I mean, so do you remember what your first record was that you I
bought myself?
Well, not necessarily that you bought yourself, but was yours?
Well, it was bought for me at Christmas by my mum and dad. Well, unfortunately, it's not too dodgy, but unfortunately, it would have been roughly the mid-70s, and parents bought your records, didn't they? And then you bought your own. So it was probably Shawadi Wadi.
Yeah.
When I was about 10. And then my dad was into, and the name's gone straight out of my head, my dad was into the band that used to go with Cliff Richard.
The Shadows.
The Shadows, and so I got some Shadows records. It was really pretty good, actually, if you like your guitar instrumentals.
I mean, they definitely influenced a lot.
And then after that, I was buying my own records, and I was never into, heavy rock or anything particularly. So it was Queen. I remember buying Queen, and then all through the 80s, I used to buy Simple Minds and U2. Very mainstream, really. Nothing particularly. No.
Well, my first record, which was a single rather than an album, which was bought for me because I asked for it, was Ernie, the fastest milkman in the West, which was 1971. So I'd have been 10. But I mean, obviously, I hadn't got anything to play it on other than the record player in the front room. The first album that I bought for myself was Ted Nugent, who most people wouldn't have heard of.
I've never heard of him either, John.
Apart from the fact he was head of the NRA in the US, I mean, he's a bit of a nutcase. Yeah, not a nutcase, but he was a wild man.
If you're head of the NRA, you are a nutcase. So,
well, he was.
What did he sing about guns? Presumably, did he?
No, not really.
No. Well, what is it, country western or something?
No, he was a rock guitarist.
All right.
But he used to run round. I saw him in Birmingham. I can't remember the year now. At the Odeon, and he's one of them guys who's just got a lot of stage presence. There wasn't much lighting or whatever, but he really filled the room with his ego, and it was a great night. I mean, obviously we enjoyed the music he was playing. He was a very good guitarist, but he's running around all over the place, jumping on the speakers. But anyway, the first album I ever bought was Ted Nugent and the Asbury Jukes. I can't remember what might have been. I'm trying to remember what the album was called now. Stormtroopers. All right, so yeah, there is one. Stormtrooping, I think, was one of them. I'll have to listen to the songs again just to see whether there's a political message in there. Never thought of it at the time. They're not like that. But anyway, that was my first album. But ultimately, and that started, certainly for me, going into record shops. But the first thing you had to have a record player. Was one of the key requirements. Otherwise, what was the point in buying records?
Well, indeed, yeah.
So I mean, I up until I had my first, I'm pretty certain it was like a Ronco, record player, which was about the same width as a single. So when you put an album on it, it overhung the actual record player itself by quite a few inches. It was really weird. Got built-in speakers. Was dirt cheap, from what I remember. And my parents had one in the front room, but that was for the use of exclusively of my mum. I never played any of my albums in there. They wouldn't want to listen to them, to be fair.
Well, that's true as well. Yeah.
So I don't know when, and I can't remember. I must have been 14, 15, maybe 13. Well, 13, 14, 15, something like that when I had my record player that I had in my bedroom. But don't know what about yourself?
Well, no. So I had with my brother, I had a record player which just had a built-in mono speaker. And it wasn't until about 4 or 5 years.
That's right, the same as me. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't until about 4 or 5 years later, which would have been, I don't know, the middle or the early 80s. Early 80s, maybe. Was it school? Well, maybe 1980, we got sort of a white. I remember it was called a hi-fi system.
High fidelity. Yeah.
Which had a record player which had speakers that you could position separately on wires, and had a tape deck and a built-in radio and that sort of thing. And you had a little glass door, and you had to put all the records underneath and all that sort of stuff. That would have been So that was a few years later. So
well, I didn't get my first hi-fi until I'd started work, and could afford it. It was with the wired speakers. I'm trying to remember if I actually put them up in my bedroom. I must have.
Yeah.
But certainly it was before I was married. But anyway, sorry, you were.
No, but I must admit, I when I lived originally in the east coast of Scotland, I didn't. There was probably 3 or 4 independent record shops, but to me, I was very much an HMV, W.H. Smith, John Menzies, as it was in Scotland as well. Boots the Chemist, which I believe you sell records. Because the independent record shops always seemed very dingy to me.
They were, but I think the problem with the Woolworths and the HMVs.
Oh, Woolworths, of course, yes, indeed, yeah.
Was that the albums that they had were more mainstream, weren't they?
That's me, Mr. Mainstream. So that was
ABBA, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
if you wanted something that was a bit more not in the chart, the singles are in the charts, but some of the bands you wouldn't necessarily get the albums.
Yeah, but the thing with that though is that you only have so much money to go around, and I didn't really want to buy stuff that. I mean, it's bad enough buying in those days an album where you recognise one song and you thought all the other ones were rubbish. To actually take something home and think, oh, this is dreadful nonsense. So I didn't have the luxury of being able to experiment in that regard. But that's
but who did? I mean, at the end of like you say,
some
they
people patently did. But I mean, otherwise, that rubbish wouldn't have been made in the first place, would it? I mean, the stuff that nobody plays anymore. But
there's a lot of. Okay, so I mean, the music I used to listen to was definitely more rock oriented.
Yeah.
In terms of and you never heard singles. It was almost like this is the band. For example, Deep Purple. Smoke on the Water. Everybody could have been knows and think, here's another album from them. But you wouldn't have heard any of it. You just go and buy the album.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, the dingy record store in my local town. And I've never seen it in any of the record shops I went in, you couldn't listen to them before.
No, I think that's a bit of a 1960s thing.
Yeah, it's certainly before my time.
And they did bring it back. So HMV brought it back in the 90s as a gimmick, but it wasn't a booth. If I vaguely remember, it was a thing on a stick, but it was for CDs. So it was like a microphone on a stick. So you listen, you put the microphone to your ear. It had to be quite robust to stop people breaking it, obviously. But I certainly never went anywhere where there was a little booth that you sometimes see in 1950s American films and such like. I don't recall that. I mean,
no.
The thing about I found when I did it when I was at college at lunchtime, so you'd wolf down your chips and beans in college and go into town and then just go and look, and it was the album covers as much as anything else. The album covers were, I mean, you couldn't open them up because 9 out of 10 they were covered in cellophane or whatever, but just the artwork, that's the one thing that's gone, or certainly by streaming, CDs a little bit, but as CDs were much smaller, just looking at the artwork on, and not to say artwork, intricate artwork, but it would be photography and, interesting things to look at, as well as look at
it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I was going to say, for me, going in some of these, when you go into more independent, to look for rock music or, rock bands and that sort of stuff, they weren't always categorized like that. They'd be alphabetized, so these are the A's, these are the B's.
Common, wasn't it? That was fairly common, wasn't it?
Yeah. So you're flicking through, and it doesn't tell you. It's not like a book when you go to the library and it tells you what the genre is.
Yeah.
You're flicking through the albums. And that was part of the fun of going into these record stores, was you'd start flicking through the albums, hundreds of them. And like you say, you look at the artwork or what was on the front cover, and the number of albums I know I bought because I thought, oh, this looks this looks good, so it's going to sound good. And obviously, many times I was very disappointed.
We've all got to think of some of the. I don't know what the genre is, but with Def Leppard, for example, they also had eye-catching album covers, didn't they? With sort of strange ghouls or something waving a flag or something. I visualised one famous one. I'm sure that's Def Leppard. And obviously, U2 used to have very eye-catching photographs of sort of the Joshua Tree National Monument in America, or some wasteland in the sort of peat bog in Ireland or something. So it would be quite eye-catching and thought-provoking. And obviously, there was all, you flick over the back and you'd have, I don't know how many, it's hard to remember now, but you'd have a dozen tracks listed with all various names and stuff, and you'd look down and say, nope, never had any of them. But I mean, I've got to admit, I'm in music, I'm unlike you. I was Mr. Best of album, to be honest. You can't really beat a best of album because it's got all the tunes you like, or it's got more tunes you like, and you're going to have some sort of, here's one record you've heard of, and the rest of them are bloody awful. But I mean, I must admit, I can literally remember the number of times I brought something back and thought I would listen to all once, think, I'm never going to listen to that ever again, am I? What a waste of £4 that was. But and it was about £4 double. That's the thing, an album for 12 tracks. I mean, what would a single be? 45p or something in the late 70s, 1980s, something along those lines. So
it's funny because one of them, I can't believe I've actually found it. I've Googled it. So there was one of the album covers had got a bloke playing a guitar with a violin bow.
Yeah, for who? Sorry, no.
No, this was on the front of the album.
Yeah, whose album?
It was a band called Gasoline.
Never heard of them.
No, never
probably wouldn't have. Yeah.
Well, no, that's right. You'd never heard of them.
Yeah.
And the album was called What a Lemon. But the irony didn't stick with me. It's funny because I'm looking at it. I just typed in "What a Lemon" lyrics, and up pops the album. It's like I'm looking at the album cover, and it's like it's taking me back. It's unbelievable now. They were Danish or something.
Yeah,
they're certainly Scandinavian. Whoever they were, this Gasoline. It's gasoline without an E. So GASOLIN apostrophe.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was almost like, wow, this. I think some of the tracks were funny from what I remember, but it certainly wasn't. It was 1976 as well, so I was 15. Well, that's just taking me. Actually looking at it, it's like I remember it now. I remember seeing it.
No, you do. You would be.
This bloke's got a guitar. He's got a violin bow on his guitar. That's got to be amazing.
Very strange, yeah.
Well,
the thing
Jimmy Page did it with Led Zeppelin. but he did it a lot better. Certainly did it a lot better.
Yeah. See, the thing about it depends where you lived, obviously, but I lived in a city, Scotland's fourth city of about 200,000 people, so it was a half a dozen shops. But the shops used to have they used to be, I wouldn't say they were celebrities, but they were sort of known to people, and they would frequently appear in the local newspapers. So they used to have a relation. It's interesting you run these shops. To be successful in a community, you needed to have a sort of a link into the local newspapers. You need to be friendly with journalists, and the journalists would run a little article of how you've got the latest album of somebody or other in. And where I came from, there was a INN Records was a big independent shop, just a record shop, and it stood for Ian and Nora, would you believe? But nobody really. Well, you have to sort of be in, and again, talking about it at school. Or Ian, do you know what it stands for? Ian Nora. Admittedly, somebody told me that, and I always remember it. It could have been absolute nonsense, but but it's interesting how they would cultivate. The owners of these shops would try and cultivate relationships with local journalists. They would sponsor in some cases something at some of the nightclubs. They would sponsor a competition, usually involving alcohol, some beer or something, and the local record shops contributed a crate of beer to the person who could throw up as far as many times in one night as anybody else, or something slightly more savoury. So again, that sort of old-fashioned cult, and it wasn't corrupt. It was a perfectly acceptable means of building the local culture, having a nice local shop that people would know of. They would read about it. I'm not saying they read about it every week in the paper, but you would read about it 2 or 3 times in the local paper a year, or one of the local papers. And, you would know that something was happening there. There might be, if there was a celebrity visiting, doing a concert or whatever in the town, they would pop in for 5 minutes, get their photograph taken with them. Whether they were presumably getting paid for that, the celebrity. I mean, we're not talking global level celebrities. We're talking like Radio 1/2 DJs and that sort of thing. They would jump out of the car for 10 minutes, get their photograph, and off to the next one, sort of thing. So all that sort of gentle public relations, cultivating a persona, getting to know or at least one local journalist, being on the circuit for celebrities. That's all gone, isn't it? I mean, to a certain extent, HMV would do that as well.
Yeah. Well, I think don't forget at that time. I mean, and it's different now. Is that to listen to music? No, and I'm not talking about actually buying albums. To get you to buy an album, there was either Top of the Pops and the radio stations. And how many radio stations were there in that period? There weren't many. So even the opportunity to hear something was pretty limited. Unless you were
Top of the Pops for foreign visitors was like a BBC primetime music show for half an hour. It was mostly live acts, inverted commas, who mimed.
Well, they were live miming. Yeah.
Yeah. So it wasn't. Yeah, but it wasn't the MTV video.
Oh no, that's what I mean. It's when you think back.
Was getting an audience of 20 million or something ridiculous, wasn't it? Because there was only 3 channels at the time. But
that's right. Yeah. I mean, the only alternative music program was the Old Grey Whistle Test, where they had more alternative, rock type bands on, and that was always on late at night. So I mean, that was on like at 10:30, 11.
You say that. My recollection was on 7 o'clock on BBC Two, but never mind.
Not the Old Grey Whistle.
Well, maybe the repeats were then.
Yeah, how
on earth would you have watched it at 10 o'clock because your parents wouldn't let you watch that?
I didn't watch it. That was the thing.
Oh, well, I watched it, so I must have watched the repeats like several years later or something then.
I have to look up the Old Grey Whistle Test when it was on. It was, but it was just that there wasn't much of a. That was one of the benefit, or one of the good things about going to a record store and finding a good album where you think, well, I've never heard of this band before, and this is great. Because you wouldn't necessarily hear them on the radio. But it does make there's no other means to hear.
No, true, but it does make you wonder. What I mean, the record shops we're talking about, and some still exist because there's still a market, and people got back into vinyl, as they now call it, for some reason. But it makes you wonder how they managed to exist, because they were fighting every large shop had a record section. So every big department store would have a record section, and so some shops would have huge ones. So what were they supplying? Was it the variety? Was it the I can't imagine they'd be much more expensive. They might be roughly the same price. How did he manage to go for 50 odd years and not get beaten down by HMV and W.H. Smith and all the rest of them?
You mean the specialists? I think they were more specialist. I mean, I don't remember. So HMV, in terms of being a big store, I don't remember being able to go to an HMV where I lived. I mean, there's an HMV now.
And do what?
And look at records.
You mean there wasn't an HMV there? You mean? Or
yeah.
Well, there was where I lived, but you
lived in, okay, so fair enough. If they were in a bigger city, then they might have had a presence. But where I lived, which is a smaller town, maybe in Birmingham,
but you had a big department store and stuff. Didn't have a record section. Generally did.
Yeah, no, they did. So I mean, like I say, Woolworths would have had one. The Debenhams potentially had one. British Home Stores, did they sell records? I think they did.
No, I don't think they did.
But they were always. Don't forget, we're not just talking about records for teenagers. We're talking about records they were selling to a much wider audience. I
suppose that's true,
but then, the albums are there as well. So
I mean, as I said, I didn't really frequent them that much, but the independent ones, did they not do Mantovani and?
No, I don't think you'd find anything. I don't think you would. No, if you wanted that type of,
all these American sort of jumper people, if you know what I mean. But
I used to go and fetch. My mum would order an album from a record shop in a neighbouring town, and her favourite at the time was Johnny Mathis, one of your Jumpered brigade. And every time she heard there was a new Johnny Mathis album out, I'd have to go and fetch it. And
but from where? From what sort of shop?
It was actually an electrical retailer shop, but she phoned up, and if they hadn't got it, they'd order it.
Right. Was it out of curiosity? Was it like a national thing?
No, it's just a local. So they sold TVs and record players, and they had records. I used to go in there and look at the records, but I mean, it was a small shop, so there's probably, say, 500 records.
Yeah.
But 500 albums, when there's, tens of thousands of albums that have actually been produced, isn't a big percentage. That was you can always get the albums if you knew who they were, what the album was. You could always go into Woolworths and order an album. There was never a problem.
No, I never did it. But that does ring a bell. I remember the forms. There used to be forms near the till, because the record section in the big shops would have its own till, obviously, not like now where you struggle to find where the bloody tills are for the entire shop. Each little section had its own till, didn't it?
That's right.
Area to buy.
So it was. So don't forget, albums covered a huge variety. Well, as music covers lots and lots of genres. It was just that these smaller record stores were, you didn't get many old folks in the smaller record stores, because the records that were in there, didn't appeal to them. It wasn't their thing. It's different now. And I mean, HMV's, when it was at its peak in terms of selling CDs, say, rather than
late 90s probably.
You had all the sections. It was a big store, and you had all of the genres split into different sections within the shop, so you could go and look at your classical music. You could go and look.
I think it's. I'm trying to visualize it where I live now. It wouldn't have that anymore, but but obviously it's now full of CDs and strange little things that people buy as a hobby, if you know what I mean. Sort of, I can't think what the term is, but lots of little Star Wars figures that are not there are Star Wars figures, but not really from the film. They're sort of in somebody else, somewhat reimagined Star Wars figures and things like that. But yeah, so you're right. I mean, it would be interesting to know what, if an independent record shop had 3,000 records, I wonder how many of them sat there for 5 years. And it was just the top 20 going.
Loads, absolutely loads, no doubt about that. I mean, don't forget that was another sort of factor, certainly for me, and I suspect for a lot of people, was cost. So the older the record, the cheaper it usually was.
Yes, that's the point. Yes.
Whereas newer albums or LPs, I mean, we always just call them LPs.
Correct. You can call them albums. LPs.
That's right. Well, album is the name that covers CDs, cassettes, streaming. So it's just a generic name, isn't it? Whereas LP.
Long players because they played longer.
That's right. Even though a single was an SP, nobody ever called it.
Yes, and you have to remember that. Well, to be fair, you still got to do it now because we've done it wrong with my daughter. And she was convinced that the record player was broken. But you've got to remember to switch the revs per minute. 33 and a third revolutions per minute on an LP, and 45 revs per minute on a single. Very occasionally you would get. This is kind of going off a wee bit off topic, but in magazines, my sister used to get Smash Hits magazine, which was all about pop stars, and it was the 80s, so it was long before bloody boy bands and stuff. But some of them were boy bands, they weren't called that back in the day. We used to get these really thin records that weren't made of whatever the records are made from. They made like very flimsy. You could, a bit like an old-fashioned floppy disk. The inside of it.
They weren't. They were vinyl, not. They were a thinner vinyl.
Yeah, but I don't think they were designed to last very long. You could get half a dozen plays out of them. And again, that's when you say a floppy disk, hopefully some of our some of our listenership won't even know what we're talking about with a floppy disk. But never mind. But it was the inside of the floppy disk anyway, not the.
Yeah, and these ones could be on the cover of a magazine.
Yes, indeed. And maybe, they can't be doing that because who the hell's going to buy a magazine if they haven't got a record player? But
just at that point, then let's stop for a word from our sponsors. So, Ian, after a hard day's podcasting, I like to, and I'm sure you do as well, like to go into the front room, put your feet on the coffee table, but it's just full of magazines.
Well, the solution to that is Stack-A-Mag, John.
Stack-A-Mag.
Stack-A-Mag. It's somewhere where you can stack all your magazines, put them out of the way, pick them up, put them down, peruse them as you see fit, and it's made from a variety of materials to suit all decors.
But will it hold thin magazines as well as thick magazines?
Well, by the laws of physics, you can get more thin magazines into it as the same as can get a small number of thick magazines. I get that it might fall out, but no, there's a little catch along the bottom, little rail, so even thin magazines will be caught by Stack-A-Mag.
So hopefully with Stack-A-Mag, you can stack them vertically and you can stack them horizontally.
Yes, we don't want them curling up at the edges, do we? So stack them the way that's best to keep them in pristine condition.
I think you've got me hooked here. I mean, if your front room is neat and tidy now because of Stack-A-Mag, I think I might have to certainly look into it.
Indeed, Stack-A-Mag for all your magazine stacking requirements.
Today's episode is sponsored by Tic Tac, helping yesterday today. Tic Tac are not responsible for any magazine spillage, fumblement, rapid unplanned destacking, or injury resulting from proper or improper use of the Stack-A-Mag. All rights reserved. No claims or returns will be honoured.
And we're back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were talking about floppy disks, or the sort of throwaway, because ultimately the needle, as long as there was a groove, it would play. Wouldn't necessarily play quality.
Well, that was the other interesting thing about it as well. Just going again is tapping into some memories I know. Is you most people would have a little array of accessories for the record player as well, wouldn't you?
That's right. Yeah.
You'd have a little. You'd have a sort of a felt pad which to get the dust off.
Red felt. It was always red felt. The ones we had.
To get off the dust off your player, you'd have.
I'm trying to remember who sold those. There was
did you even have some sort of fluid that you could put on the record or something?
Oh, I think the expensive ones you could start doing stuff like that.
But the stylus.
Well, I mean, there's a whole thing about the stylus, wasn't there?
The ones I had were the very first record player, the sort of mono thing. It was like some sort of lump of crystal. I mean, it wasn't this. But later on, the other ones were sort of detachable units in a little glass thing.
That's right, or plastic.
Plastic, so you're right, it wasn't glass. It was clear plastic that protected it. Still didn't stop you occasionally breaking it, but it was a relatively straightforward thing. You go into W.H. Smith and there'd be a rack with styluses and shrink
wrap. And you had to
it.
know the code. I mean, because they would wear out. Or they were changeable.
Friction, isn't it? It was
that's right. Yeah. It's just funny that all disappeared. People used to make needles for record players. And
well, it still exists, but the business must be minute in comparison to what it used to be.
Well, considering almost everybody had a record player.
Yeah.
And now nobody has. Almost nobody.
I think lots of people are getting back into it. I mean, I think there was more vinyl in the UK sold last year than CDs. But that.
No, but and how many CDs? But CDs
well, exactly.
now versus CDs at the peak
is. But it's a premium product as well. I mean, a Taylor Swift album will set you back £45.
Well, that's because they don't press so many.
It's a premium brand. It's the Apple and the Audi and the BMW.
Yeah, but you say it's the premium brand, but you put it on your record player and it's got some dust on it, and then it's all crackly.
I don't get it. But people say it's a nicer sound. Certainly a nicer sound than a CD. I get that because of the compression and all the rest of it. Not a CD, sorry, an MP3. But
but that's by people who are snobbish. Who've got an expensive record player going, I've got these speakers and I've got gold-plated wires.
You can't be snobbish in your own bedroom. But it's.
But when you're paying £40 and a pop.
Well, unless you go around telling people, but it's subjective. Let's be. It's very subjective, and to be honest, John, if you've been spending your 1970s listening to prog rock, your hearing is ruined anyway, so you wouldn't be able to tell.
And
I suspect I wouldn't either, to be honest, having listened to bloody loud music on headphones.
That was always my thing with people who you have these hi-fi nuts. So when I bought my first stereo or hi-fi system from a proper hi-fi shop that sold the pucker stuff. It wasn't from HMV.
And there was always at least one of those in most towns which were well known in down the pub.
You could buy speaker cable that was either £1 a yard or like £25 a yard, and it was like, I could never afford that anyway. But if you ever talk to people who are aficionados of that, they do insist that the sound quality is that much better. And
it was I don't believe it. Depending where you were at the time in terms of the technology, in terms of your age, if you were still at school or college, there was always one person in every form or class, whatever you want to call it, who was the hi-fi guru, and he would bore for whatever country you happen to be in about this, that, and the other, and woofers, subwoofers, this, that, and
that's right, yeah.
And you think, well, what bass speakers? What music do you play? And Jesus, I wouldn't want to listen to that under any circumstances. Never mind, never mind on your £900 bloody whatever. Again, I get the impression that genre is not completely gone, but because it still exists, because people have it for the TVs and all sorts of stuff, don't they? But again, it's not. I don't get.
But that's to give you a different effect, though, isn't it? That's more for surround sound and stuff
I've
like
got
that.
a teenage daughter, and her, all right, girls are a wee bit different. They don't tend to be so nerdy. That's not sexism, just a fact. They don't talk about things like that. They just want things to work.
That's right. Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? I wonder if that was a cultural thing coming from the 60s and 70s, that having technology for technology's sake and then trying to relate it to cultural changes like music and stuff was the apogee of coolness. But then in reality, the people who did it generally weren't that cool. I'm trying to visualize the people that I can remember who used to go on about it. And even when I started working in Birmingham, there was a couple of guys I worked with who used to. There's a good famous shop down Bristol Road that people used to go to, and I think, well, really, is it going to make that much difference? And you're listening.
Absolutely, yeah. It depends on your hearing.
And you're listening to Duran Duran on it, and they're much better on that, are they?
Or what is it? Trust Me, I'm a Womble, or whatever. Well, that
was forever. 10 years before, but it's Remember You're a Womble.
Remember, that's right. I'm glad you remembered. Yeah. Remember You're a Womble.
I was a Womble. But it's no, it's interesting. There was a whole subculture around music. So the bottom end, and I just mean that as I don't mean that in any discriminative sense. The bottom end, your locals or your independent shops. The top end are your HMVs, and the middle are your sort of department stores. You had aficionados who would spend all Saturday afternoon flicking through albums, and then there were people just going by something like me because they liked the sound. They seen it on.
Well, they had it on the radio. That's right.
Yeah, on the radio,
TV or on the radio, or whatever.
And then all the equipment that went with it, and all the cultural baggage that went with it. I'm glad to say that when I became an adult and I was socialising with people from work and stuff. I don't remember ever having long conversations in a pub about subwoofers, but I'm sure some people.
Wrong people you mixed with. Yeah.
So I'm sure some people. Well, I was living in a bedsit, so having a subwoofer we wouldn't have gone down very well with the landlady. But so. And that was the other thing as well, that you get less of now, but people still blaring music through party walls. I'm sure that's still a thing, but thank God I don't have to listen to it. But that was a side effect of antisocial behaviour of thumping music, which is still a bit of that now. People do it in their cars and on the train.
Oh, that's right, yeah. But one of the just to move it on a little bit was cassette tapes.
Yeah,
and ultimately, I don't think cassette tapes actually killed off vinyl. I think that, I did buy tapes.
No, I did as well. I bought lots of tapes. But you wouldn't get a single tape, would you? Obviously,
no, that's right. So they didn't kill off singles.
Buy them.
No, I don't think they did. I don't think you go in and buy a tape that only had 4 minutes on it or something.
No.
But there was definitely a shift. There's no doubt about that. But I don't think that.
Well, I think it became a thing when when we grew up and bought a car.
That's right. It was more about listening to music on the move, wasn't it?
Yeah, but I certainly had it. Me and my brother. It's funny actually thinking about it. My brother bought more records and I bought more cassettes. Because he was a bit more experimental than me. Because you could tell I'm more experimental, and I was more of the best of.
You do want to listen to all of the other
stuff that you never listen to.
Influential stuff.
You never listen to ever again, and it isn't actually played at all now. Anywhere by and large. But and again, there was a whole sub industry of bits that you needed for your cassette. I had a splicing kit. You could splice tape together.
Well, and you don't consider yourself a hi-fi nerd? Who had
that was just a bit then, because you used to get all screwed up inside the machine, didn't they? And you think, well, I've just spent £5 on this, which was a lot of money in those days.
Chuck it in the bin then. Yeah.
Well, no, you could splice it back together again. And I wasn't. Don't be wrong. I wasn't editing it. I was just making it. I was just making it work. So it would go through the machine again, and all right, you'd lose 3 minutes or 30 seconds or something, but you'd have the other. Because if you bought and a lot of times you were making your own tapes off the radio, weren't you? Which was
I was going to say, did you do that then? You got a radio cassette.
I was doing that I was doing that when I had a car.
Well, yeah, it'd be like, okay. Did you ever do so? At the beginning, I didn't have a radio cassette. I had a radio and I had a cassette player.
Yes, and I had one. I used to hold it up against the radio.
That's right, yeah. So it was like, okay, shush. Right, I'm recording.
Well, I was able to do it in my room, so it'll have been dispatched somewhere. But and even more sadly, I used to have a mixtape of all the BBC theme tunes, the various programs as well. You've just triggered a memory. I just triggered Grandstand and God knows what else. If I ever listened to it, I suspect I didn't. I'm talking about when I was a child, by the way, not when I wasn't driving down the M40 listening to the theme for Grandstand like Alan Partridge. But yeah, all these bizarre things that people, because of technology, just don't need to do. You're on Spotify, you have your favourites, and you can pick and choose what you want to listen to, or you can curate a list and all that good stuff.
It's so clean now. It's almost like there's no effort.
Well, you don't get the DJ speaking all over it, Bruno Brooks,
that's right,
and all the various other ones,
Or at the beginning or at the end. That's right.
Yeah.
It's almost like, and then you had to turn it off and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It was, but there was more effort put into it because you had to get the right time to be able to listen.
But again, but the record shops would sell kit that enabled you to do that, and in terms of keeping your cassette head clean, you would buy it. There was a little cassette.
That's
you could buy that
cleaned. I forgot about those. Yeah.
Cleaned the tape head.
What do you think that, with the blank cassettes, because obviously that used to be a massive market. You'd walk into a big shop and there'd be Maxell or Maxell and Kodak, didn't they do? I can't remember the big ones.
BASF.
BASF.
Yeah.
And were they any better, do you think?
There was, and there was, as near the end, the hi-fis came with a Dolby noise cancelling button as well. Do you remember all that? And people would sometimes use metal tapes.
I remember those. They had tapes that had metal in them, didn't they, or something?
Yeah,
there was
metalized, because obviously it's a magnetic process. So I suppose the more metal you've got, the more data you're recording, I suppose, in principle.
I never had one, but because they were too expensive, those tapes.
No.
You know, but like you say, buying the tape head cleaner, which you'd religiously do once a week or something, or every day, just to get the fluff off the off the head.
And then if you had a dual cassette system as part of your hi-fi, if you were known to have one at school, people would give you tapes and a blank tape for you to copy.
That's right. Yeah.
Does that make? Well, why would they give it to you if it? Well, you would ask them. Yeah, that's right. You would ask them for the original. You would copy it and give it to them back. But obviously you wouldn't get a sleeve or any. You have to write it, and you have to write it down all the tracks and on the inside of the cassette box and all that sort of good stuff.
But it was easier in some ways to do a mixtape. I mean, that's where the term came from, wasn't it? Now it's just playlist. It's a.
But again, these shops would sell the blank tapes, but then so would everybody else. But again, it was a revenue generating.
Oh, the number of tapes I remember throwing away when I moved house, and I moved my first house, 100%. It was like there's hundreds.
I had a suitcase full of them. It's the same way you got a suitcase full of old photographs. I had a suitcase full of old tapes, and my other half did as well.
Even though you could over-record them as well, you'd still not reuse them.
There was a little tab where you could click out that stopped it being overtaped, but you could put a bit of sellotape.
That's right. Yeah, there was that. Yeah, to prevent it being re-recorded or whatever.
So it's interesting. I mean, but the independent record shop still exists. There's one where I live. I don't think it's doing very well. It only opens 3 days a week. So obviously it's probably surviving off the internet in terms of listing things for other people outside the immediate area to buy through the post. And vinyl still exists and record players still exist, and there's a niche for them. And
but more of a nerdy niche than a
Well, it's. I think what it is with my daughter is to try and persuade her that at least it's a tangible thing, isn't it?
Yeah. No, that's
Here's
right.
a tangible thing that you could tangibly do rather than just flicking.
Hold it in your hand. That's right. Yeah. Okay, right. So I know this one's a little bit of a shorter one. I think we had a bit of fun with that. I think sometimes these whatever happens to's are always a bit of fun. So anyway, any feedback? Anybody got any thoughts in our listenership? Please let us know. You know where we are, ORC_time on Twitter and Conversations in Time on Facebook. Thanks for listening. You'll be hearing from us again very soon. Bye for now.
Bye.
That's it. Now we know you enjoyed that, or maybe you didn't. But why not let us know what you think? But you can go on Twitter, or X if that's the way you get dressed, and search for ORC_time to find us. On Facebook, simply search for Conversations in Time and leave your thoughts right there.